Dish Network, Channel 9415, Free Speech TV, 9410, Link TV, and Direct TV, Channel 375. More video and audio podcasting at democracynow.org. Our headlines available in Spanish for any radio station to take, as over 180 are, and the transcripts of those Spanish headlines are also on our website. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. Juan?
Well, thousands of protesters were disappointed Wednesday when San Francisco authorities suddenly altered the route of the Olympic torch relay in order to avoid the demonstrators. Similar protests condemning China's human rights abuses had attempted to disrupt the torch along its earlier stops in Athens, Istanbul, Paris, and London. Jacques Rogue, the president of the International Olympic Committee, responded to the protests over this year's Olympic Games. Speaking in Beijing today, he said he was saddened by the disruptions to the torch relay in Europe. He reminded athletes of the Olympic rule against political demonstrations at the Games.
Be inspired by the full compliance with the Olympic Charter. And in the Olympic Charter, you have Rule 51.3 that says that no kind of demonstrations or political, religious, or racial propaganda is permitted in any Olympic site, venue of areas.
This is Jennifer Taguillo, pro-Tibet demonstrator in San Francisco, speaking before the torch relay Wednesday.
There are some severe human rights violations going on, and they are being perpetrated by China. So I am here to make sure that my voice is heard, that I am not okay with human rights violations.
Meanwhile, both Democratic presidential candidates, Senators Clinton and Obama, have now called on President Bush to consider boycotting the opening ceremony of the Olympic Games in Beijing this August. But on Tuesday, President Bush told EWTN Television, a Catholic TV network, that, quote, nobody needs to tell old George Bush that he needs to bring religious freedom to the doorstep of the Chinese, because I've done that now I'm on my 8th year doing it. I've talked about freedom of religion every time I visited with them. I've talked about Darfur. I've talked about Burma. I've talked about the Dalai Lama. I don't need the Olympics to express my position.
To discuss the politics around the upcoming Beijing Olympics, we're joined in our Firehouse studio by Minky Worden. She is the media director of Human Rights Watch, editor of a new book coming out in May. It's called China's Great Leap, the Beijing Games and Olympian Human Rights Challenges. Welcome to Democracy Now!, Minky. Let's talk first about the relay. Have you taken a stand on whether or not this should be going on? And we'll talk about China next.
Well, Human Rights Watch has taken the position that the torch relay itself should not go through the Tibetan areas of China. And there's been a lot of attention on the relay in London, in Paris. We've said in those circumstances that the main thing the torch relay is illuminating with its flame is the total lack of a human rights policy of the governments of the UK, of the governments of France, and also of the United States. But the real problem is on the horizon, and that is when the torch relay goes into China itself. The Chinese government has said that it will definitely run the relay through the Tibetan areas, across the base of Everest, and through Lhasa. And that is a guaranteed situation where major human rights abuses will happen. The protests so far may be only the beginning, and there could be another major deadly crackdown on the horizon around the torch relay inside China.
In other words, you're saying that there may be protests by the Tibetan people as the torch is going through their
I think there certainly will be, even in the highly controlled recent sort of media tours the Chinese government has arranged. There have been protests, monks who've literally risked their lives and certain imprisonment to express their concerns about religious freedom inside China. And in relation, for example, to San Francisco, where the attention has been recently, Human Rights Watch identified months ago that the question of the torch route, we've been in negotiations with the mayor along with the ACLU and other groups to make the route public. I think there are certainly a lot of disappointed protesters in the Bay Area who didn't get a chance to make their views heard.
I was shocked in reading last night the history of the Olympic torch relay. The torch itself going back to ancient Greece, but the relay to the Nazi Olympics, 1930. 36.
There's a wonderful book, a new academic book called Nazi Games, which gives a concise history of this. But the torch relay itself is essentially a PR invention of the Nazi era. And the point of it was to run the torch through parts of Europe that Germany hoped to, the Nazis hoped to take over, including the Sudetenland. So it really, I think if the corporate sponsors of the torch relay really knew the history of this, I can't imagine that they'd want to be associated with it. And those sponsors are Coca-Cola, Lenovo, and Samsung. And Human Rights Watch has also spent the last year writing to and communicating with the corporate sponsors about the they're literally paying for the Olympics. The Olympics are paid for by the corporate sponsors. But there's certainly going to be a price to pay in terms of corporate reputation if the torch relay inside China turns into a major human rights debacle.
But isn't this part of the general problem, obviously, with the International Olympic Committee and the Olympic Games, that it's become so dominated by the commercial interests that sponsor it rather than the original goal of the Games as a means of greater contact and interchange between countries and athletes? How do you see the potential to be able to influence these companies?
Well, I'd like to return to your question, which is really about the International Olympic Committee and what this body is. I mean, I've been working on China for many years and working on the International Olympic Committee for a couple of years. I've come to the conclusion that the Chinese government is much more open, transparent, and accountable than the International Olympic Committee. The committee, what they really need is human rights benchmarks around awarding the Games. And the Chinese government made very specific pledges in relation to human rights in 2001 when they were bidding for the Games. That included full freedom for the media to report and human rights improvements. So today, 4 months before the Games arrive in Beijing, you don't see any